Okay, and it looks like it's 5:30. So welcome to the May work session. We're going to go ahead and start off with Vince Adams from OSBA leading us in a board evaluation process. So welcome, Vince, and thanks for being here. And you now have the mic.
All right, thanks for having me again. And it's nice to be with you, if only virtually this time. And so I'm going to take hopefully about 30 minutes and give you an overview of OSBA's new board self-assessment. Up until this point, we've had an board self-assessment based on the 5 roles of the board, which was some fairly early research, and now research has moved along. But I have a slide deck. Let me share my screen very quickly. That's the wrong screen. This is the one I want. Here we go. And I can see that is coming through. So, all right. And I think everybody on the board has met me before. I was there at the beginning of the school year with Cal and Sterling. We talked about roles and responsibilities and ethics and whatnot. And so here we are at the end of the year, and this is board self-assessment season. I'm doing a lot of these talks. So I did not look at your policies, but you should have a policy BK that the board should be expressing its expectation for itself to evaluate its own performance, just like we evaluate the performance of the superintendent, and downward through the organization, we evaluate performance and really strive for excellence. And so we should be communicating that through our own behavior. And so no OSBA presentation is complete without some mention of policy, and here's the obligatory mention. So, looking at board self-assessment is actually very timely. There was a bill in the short session that surprisingly it failed. It didn't make it out of the Ways and Means Committee, along with many other bills. My understanding is that they just ran out of time and couldn't pass all the legislation that they had. But Senate Bill 334 was a mandatory training bill for school boards. There are many states in the U.S. that require that school boards have some sort of training, but Oregon is not one of those. And so this bill would establish that under law. And the big planks of it are that it would require a self-assessment every 2 years, and that at the end of that assessment, that the board would develop some sort of plan of development, some sort of course of training that the board would want to engage in, and that the board would have to report on their progress on that plan at the end of the 2-year cycle, and then reassess and rinse and repeat. There's some other details in that bill, and we expect in the upcoming legislative session that this bill will come back, and that it will be very likely likely pass. So it's important that the board be considering self-assessment because it's going to be required of us going forward. So the board has seen this slide before. This is a timeline of the research around school boards and their impact on student impact or student outcomes. Prior to the late 1990s, early 2000s, the dominant narrative in the research around school boards was that they weren't good for school functioning. They weren't good for student outcomes because that they tended to be create discontinuity, that there was political change, that they were just difficult and hard to manage. And we're talking about locally elected school boards. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Lighthouse studies were done. And what that did is they measured if you apply training to school boards, will they change their practice, and does that have an impact on student outcomes? And they found that indeed that is true, that they do. And that was done in 2 series. There was Lighthouse 1 and Lighthouse 2. That research has since matured and has been very vibrant up to today, and has continued to strengthen our understanding of how board practice impacts student outcomes. And this research grounds all the work that we do at OSBA, and it also grounds our board self-assessment. Now, I mentioned just a few moments ago that our previous board self-assessment was based on 5 standards, and those were the 5 roles of the board that came out of those lighthouse inquiries back in the 90s. Today, we are basing our new assessment on the research that Alsbury and Gore have done, and it's in balanced governance theory, and it has 12 standards. And the 12 more isn't necessarily better, but the new survey does provide much more detail, and it's based on more current research around the connection about how boards impact students. So again, you've seen this content before, but I want to go over it because it really reinforces what you're going to be evaluating on. And so the current research shows us that there are really 6 things that boards need to be focusing on. The first is that setting that long-term vision and goals for what education should look like in the Sherwood School District, that you're creating the climate and allocating resources towards that vision, and that you're using data and monitoring to hold the system accountable towards those goals. That the board is doing cohesive teaming, which is just a snazzy way of saying getting together, like as the board is right now. The board, the superintendent, and the cabinet are in the room learning together around a particular topic. That's cohesive teaming. So that the board is part of a learning organization, and that we're all learning together to try to improve our practice. And the other ones here are stakeholder and community engagement. The board is positioned as that interface between the institution of K-12 education or public education in the community and the community itself. You are that conduit. And so it's important that you be ambassadors to the community and be also that conduit of bringing the community into the decision-making processes around the institution of public education. And then the last piece is governing through policy and holding the system accountable through policy. So these are the things that we associate with effective, high-performing boards that have positive impacts on student outcome. And so just to recap here, that we want to be focusing on that long-term vision and setting goals for the district, that we're allocating resources towards that, and we're creating that culture and climate that fosters that innovation and progress towards that vision goals, that we're monitoring progress using data, using evidence to base our decisions, that we're learning together as a team, that we're engaging the community, bringing them into the process, our decision-making processes, and also communicating those successes back out into the community, and then holding the whole system accountable through policy governance. So those are the behaviors associated with positive impacts on student outcomes. Now, there are also behaviors that are associated with negative impacts on student outcomes. And so again, the board has seen this slide before, and this is just a couple of articles and just lists some of those behaviors that, where we don't spend our time efficiently, where we have less orderly meetings, when we don't have strong, cohesive relationships on the board. Members are seeking to advance their own agendas. We have poor working relationships, less focus on policy items. The one that I really appreciate here near on the top is less time spent talking about student achievement. And literally, when they look at this, when they're doing the research, they have graduate students with stopwatches, and they're watching videos of school board meetings, and they're timing how much time the board is spending talking about students. So it makes sense. It's almost commonsensical that if we spend more time talking about students and the needs of students and focusing on student achievement, we're going to get better outcomes. Over here in Debriefing and O'Brien in 2016, we don't want the board to be disengaged. You should have informed oversight of district processes, but that doesn't mean that we're micromanaging, but we also don't want to be just approving whatever the superintendent brings into the boardroom. And we want to be prepared, and we need to be asking those hard questions and having full understanding of what's going on. Next, a few of these here talk about making excuses, referring to external pressures as the main reasons for lack of student success. And we've heard these narratives before. It's you can blame the teachers. The teachers, if all they really want is they want to get paid more and work less, and that the teachers are the reason why we don't have student success. Or another one is the parents. If we had parent engagement, then we would have student success. The reality is that the board itself is responsible for student success, that we have to believe that each and every child can succeed because the evidence shows that they can. There are districts that have achieved that, where every student succeeds. So if they can do it, and I can tell stories about that, but we don't have time for that, but it's the board's responsibility for student outcomes. Last one's here. Anecdotes and personal experiences drive decisions instead of data. We always need to be basing our decisions on evidence, not on necessarily our own personal experience, but on anecdotal information, but on real evidence. Okay, and so just to recap, the problems that the behaviors that are associated with negative impacts on students, micromanagement, having board members or the whole board crossing that line into operations is never a healthy situation. External blaming, or we're blaming external factors instead of assuming responsibility for student outcomes for us by ourselves. Having poor relationships that's within the board, between the board and the superintendent, or between the board and the community. Spending less time on talking about students, talking about other topics, talking about adult problems, and then relying on anecdotes and personal agendas to drive our legislative agendas and our decision making. So these are the behaviors associated with negative student outcomes. Okay, but how do you know? How do you know if you're doing good or bad? And this is a legitimate question, because the reality is that nobody, there are not very many people around who are schooled in school governance. There's no class in high school about school governance, and none of you knew anything about how to be on a school board until you actually got elected and ended up here and started learning about how to do this work. So it's true that, the more experienced the board is, the better they are at evaluating themselves, because they know what the expectations are on their performance. And so that's why we do self-assessment, because school boards are the best folks to judge themselves in their practice. And so, Lord Kelvin tells us, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Or Peter Drucker, famous business consultant, says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so the whole point of board self-assessment is to allow you to manage your practice as a whole board, so you can start setting priorities on what you want to improve and identify those strengths that the board has that you want to leverage so you can get better in your practice. So this is the chart on the right-hand side is an example of real data. This is from a real school district. And so you can see that while previously I would have shown you just 5 columns of data, now I'm showing you 12. And the whole point of this is to ask the question, are you meeting your expectations? Are you meeting your expectations for yourselves? What are those strengths, and what are those opportunities for growth? And so this is just a snapshot into the data. You will receive a data report with many, many pages of data that you will be able to digest and dive into and analyze yourselves. And of course, you will get my experience looking at the data as well. And we will have a debriefed conversation if we go ahead and do this. So I want to walk you through the standards of the whole board survey. Sneak preview, there are actually 2 surveys. There's a whole board survey and there's an individual practices survey. And we'll go through the standards on both of these. So the first one is the whole board. And so these are the 12 standards in the whole board survey. And the first one is vision directed planning. And if you, as we're going through this, you're going to probably notice that there is some connections between the standards in this survey and the research, those 6 behaviors that I showed you just a little bit ago associated with positive student outcomes. And that's because this survey is grounded in the current research on school board performance, and it's nationally normed. That is to say, it has been used nationwide and is tested in for US school boards. So the first one, vision directed planning. We engage staff and community in development of shared vision of focusing on student learning. Community engagement, it's kind of self-explanatory, that recognizing that all members of the community are stakeholders and you have collaborative partnerships. Effective board leadership. I really appreciate this standard because it really talks more, it's not just about, taking a leadership role, but it's about empowering people throughout the organization to take action on behalf or to do good for children. Accountability is setting high expectations for learning for every student and using policy to hold the district accountable. 5, using data for continuous improvement. I think maybe 15 years ago, we could have gotten away with not using data, prior to No Child Left Behind. But after No Child Left Behind, it's just simply not acceptable for school boards to not be using student data for decision-making. And so using data for continuous improvement, school boards need to be data savvy. Number 6 is a new one, cultural responsiveness. When I went to high school, school boards didn't necessarily need to be culturally responsive. And it was okay that, maybe 30% of the kids didn't graduate, a 70% graduation rate, in 1986 was success. That was okay. Today, we know that if a child doesn't graduate from high school, they will struggle to participate in the 21st century economy. And so it's absolutely essential that school boards be culturally responsive because we are a country of many cultures. And so we have to meet kids where they're at. Culture and climate. This is about, school boards create culture or create organizational culture. The way you conduct yourselves in your meetings and the way you interact with staff creates organizational culture. And, as the saying goes, if the school board does something wrong, it finds its way into classrooms the next day. But if the school board is doing right things, it finds its way into classrooms the next day. So you can cultivate a positive and healthy board culture that influences your district. Number 8 is a new one that, K-12 education is a learning organization, and it makes sense that school boards would be a part of that culture, that learning organization. So ensuring that the district functions as a self-renewing professional community that supports reflection, discovery, and improvement and success at all levels. That we have high expectations for our own development as well as the whole organization, all the way down to the child. 9, systems thinking. This really speaks to understanding the fact that if we make a change in one part of the organization, that will very likely have cascading effects throughout the rest of the organization. And so as school board members, we need to be thinking about that, okay, we're going to change this policy here, but what are those other impacts that are going to happen because of that? What might be the unintended consequences? Innovation and creativity. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, that not that long ago, well, maybe it was, 1986 was a while ago, but a certain amount of failure was okay. But today, the expectations are much higher on K-12 education, much higher on administrators, and much higher on school boards. And it's incumbent on us to be innovative and creative to transform the system to meet the expectations that society is placing on K-12 education. So I really appreciate standard number 10 here, that school boards should be expecting themselves to be innovative and creative. And the last two here, number 11 and number 12, really speak to those nuts and bolts, really the foundation of board work, that we're able to, conduct ourselves with care and respect, that we are ethical, and that we foster a positive relationship with the superintendent. And that 12, that we can budget and handle, and that we're financially, accountable and good stewards of public resources. So that was the whole board survey, or the standards for the whole board survey. And the unit of analysis for this survey is the whole board. There's a second survey, and this is the individual practices or characteristics survey that uses the individual board member as the unit of analysis. And so this is an example. This really drives at these questions on the left-hand side of the screen. Do we have shared understanding of the role of the board? Are we aligned in that understanding, and are we working together there? What is my leadership style, and how do I interact with my board? How does the board interact together? And so this chart is actually the first of the standards or characteristics. It's called role boundary, and it's one that I talked about a little bit earlier. That disengaged board. Am I disengaged where I'm I'm not even reviewing my packet? The superintendent can ask for whatever, and I'm going to approve that. Or versus overreaching, where I'm showing up in the superintendent's office and telling them, well, you need to hire this particular coach for football. And the reality is that we need to be in the middle. We need to be in that informed oversight space that's in this sweet spot in the middle, where I'm not disengaged. I understand that the superintendent is going to have some sort of process for hiring that coach, and that's going to be aligned with board policy. And I might get a little insight onto what that process looks like, but I'm not involved in that process, and I'm not making that decision for the superintendent. That's delegated, and so that you're in that middle space. So that's just an example of one of them. And so that's the first one here. There's 10 standards for this. Role boundary is the first one. Role orientation really is talking about, do we foster open dialogue, or is our dialogue positional? Are we applying litmus tests based on policy positions? We see a lot of this in national politics, and we would hope that doesn't find its way into our boardrooms, because we know that polarizing, being positional is not effective for discourse and, getting things done. Advocacy focus, am I positional, or am I holding the interests of students? Am I focusing on all students? Student concern focus really speaks to, am I targeted on a certain part of the student body? So maybe I'm coming to the school board because I really feel passionate about just special education students, or am I thinking about the success of all students? And how do I move back and forth between those? Solution focus is, do I use off-the-shelf standardized ones, or do I try to empower folks at the lowest possible level in the organization to create solutions, creating local and contextualized solutions that create pathways for all students? Number 6 is exercise of influence, individual authority versus collective authority. So as a board member, do I try to impose my will on the board, or am I working together with my board members to develop an agenda and advance that agenda for the betterment of all students? Use of voice, do I tell and sell my position, or do I try to hear and understand my colleagues to try to come to a cohesive solution? Use of power, power over versus power with. My decision-making style, do I like to make decisions individually, or do I like to do that collaboratively? And then the last one here is motivation for service. am I doing it for altruistic or personal reasons? And so those are the standards for the individual survey. So I want to go over the board development cycle. I'm going to pull these up. This board has done board roles and responsibilities. I think to do a board self-assessment and you've had a whole year of work under your belt after that, I think that you're probably in a good place so that you could navigate this survey and understand the terms and be able to reflect on your practice. So I don't think that you need a roles and responsibilities to be effective in doing the self-assessment. So the next step would be just go ahead and take the survey or surveys. And then after that, we would debrief the self-assessment, which it really is comprised of walking through the data and seeing what comes up. We have some tools here in-house that allow us to tease things out and look at things a little more fine than just looking at the charts. And I would facilitate that conversation with the board. The next piece would be setting development goals, looking at where are those areas for growth and what are those strengths that we want to leverage, and thinking about activities in both of those channels. And then the next step would be next year, you would start engaging those activities, whatever those development activities would be. Could be training with OSBA, but it doesn't have to be. You can do book studies, your own individual study. There are other consultants. You can go to conferences. There's lots of things that you can do to skill up on your board work. So just to recap what you get with the service, the surveys are deployed online. So it's SurveyMonkey. So you get to be in the comfort of your own home on a computer. You can walk through these. They say it takes about 25 minutes to go through each of these surveys. So you'll want to get a hot cup of coffee and sit down. It's going to take a little while to do these. You will get data reports for both surveys. I will perform the analysis for your board, and I will facilitate your conversation and have a conversation with you on the results. In the future, we hope to do individual reports and mentoring. That service is not available at this time. So those individual behavior and characteristics reports, that gets rolled up to the whole board. So, we're not going to be able, individuals aren't going to be able to tell who reported what or any of that. It would be whole board data. The nice thing about this is that if you start this year with this, my expectation, because this tool is so much more robust than our previous product offering, I'm pretty confident that the shelf life for these self-assessments is easily 2 years. I think it's going to give you a lot of information that allow you to plan a pretty robust development cycle for you. And so, but I would urge you to take the assessment again in a couple of years and see how your data changes and see how you make progress. So my question for the board is, do you want to do the self-assessment with Oregon School Boards Association? I would love to do this with you. The other piece is, do you want to do just the whole board survey, which really isn't optional, you need to do that, or do you want to do both the whole board and individual characteristics survey? And so that's really the answer I need tonight. Those two answers are what I need tonight.
Okay, I mean, as far as moving ahead, I like the idea of the evaluation. I don't think it would make any sense to do one without the other if we're going to do it. I think we do about this individual and group evaluations. It makes sense if it's something that's going to be part of our process anyway. So I would be up for taking the survey. I don't have a problem with it. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Well, is there a cost associated with the debriefing of the survey reports? And then I'm assuming the trainings that follow.
So the board self-assessment is all one price. It's $575 for the service itself plus any travel.
And then the trainings that would be on top of that are suggested, I'm sure, are an additional cost.
That would be an additional cost. It really, I can't even predict the types of trainings that would follow because it's really dependent on what comes out of the data. It really varies pretty widely from district to district.
Would it make sense to wait until, because we do have some turnover happening, so would it make sense to start this process when that happens, so that this new person, whoever that may be, is included in this survey and training? I mean, obviously the survey would be, well, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's always a challenging situation. And this happens around election time as well. My recommendation would be against to go ahead and do the self-assessment. The reality is it takes a board member really a year to get up to speed. Really, and honestly, at the earliest I would recommend is at 6 months. And so that person is going to be at sea for a while, whoever comes onto the board, unless they were on a previous board or something like that, and they were very familiar with school board work. Then I might might go the other direction. But I think in the situation, I would recommend go ahead and just assess. And then if you want to do it again with that individual after a year, we can come back and do another board self-assessment. We could do this again if you'd like. In the grand scheme of consulting, $575 is not a lot of money. So the expense, we try to keep that barrier as low as we can.
I mean, I would say, in 15 years, I've never done a board self-evaluation or self-assessment. So it's, there's some hesitancy and the fact that I'm going, yeah, for sure, as Director Thorne said. But I guess where I do see the benefit of doing this is to get a baseline and kind of a starting point to grow and to recognize individually. I mean, even for me being on the board a long time, okay, where am I? Where is this board? And really what direction do we need to go, or where are some of our strengths that we can look to, and where are some of the areas that we probably aren't as strong at. So that would be my perspective on it. I'm fine with trying. I don't have a problem taking the assessment, I guess.
You will get actionable information out of the survey. I guarantee that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would say that given how much turnover we've had on this board and with turnover to come, I think that there is value in looking at how can we be the highest performing board possible. And we only get that by asking ourselves some questions and measuring that, I think, as a basis, not for trying to be negative, but just to be honest with ourselves that board service isn't something that is, as Vince said, it's not something that's taught. It's something that we learn over time. And I think if we can focus where we spend development time on things that are going to be helpful to the board, I think that's useful right there, so that we don't pick development activities that are teaching us things that we're already good at, or building consensus around something that we're already high performing at, but really looking at how can we get better. So I'm in favor of doing it.
I'm in favor of doing it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good, and ultimately it's not as if we have to schedule 12 work sessions to fix ourselves theoretically, or work on things, especially if there are other things that we need to do. But Vince, I would say at least we seem to have kind of a consensus of, let's give it a whirl, and just go from there. It's a little bit new for all of us, very new for all of us. So I think we'll just accept your guidance on that. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we want to go ahead and do both surveys.
I think so.
And-
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense. If we're going to do both. Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you with is, again, you've seen this slide before. And this is a causal chain that's grounded in the research that, what you do matters. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to do this work, to do a board self-assessment, because your staff is in the room and you're streaming live and people are watching. And so you're communicating that you have high expectations for yourselves, and that communicates expectations downward through the organization. So board's doing something good tonight, and that's going to be in classrooms tomorrow. So thank you for all that you do for students in your community. And I look forward to working with you on this topic. I will connect with the board secretary and set up a date. But thanks a lot, and I will let you get back to your meeting. I yield back to the chair.
Great. Thank you, Vince. We appreciate it. Look forward to getting the results. Have a great evening.
Take care. Have a good evening, folks.
Okay. And with that, our next up, Mr. Rose and Mr. Bell.
Making me cough. Good evening, Chair Hecker, Superintendent Cordy, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening to bring you another update on the facility use change, and particularly about fees. For those of you that were not here at the last presentation on this topic on April 13th, I wanted to share with you the goals. Excuse me, it's not advancing. Thank you. Thanks, Christine. The goals of our facility use agreement work. Basically, we needed to update the language of the agreement to include some important pieces of information. And we needed to make clear what the expectations we had of those that were using our facilities and what expectations those folks could have of the school district. And in addition, we are striving for more parity among our local youth activity and sports organizations in terms of what they are charged for using school facilities. In addition, I would remind the board that current policy requires that we break even. You will see from this presentation in the following slides that we are not close to this requirement, nor are we advocating to get there. This is about making parity amongst our groups in terms of what they pay. And here's a quick list of our topics: current pricing, new pricing, the revenue comparison, and some feedback that we received from the groups as we met with them. So this slide shows you how the pricing is supposed to work for facility rentals based on group category. It's an hourly charge depending on the group and the type of facility being used. This is what the board has approved for many years. Each spring, they approve a fee structure, and this is what's been on the books. However, I think it's important to remember that we inherited a different pricing structure from the city that the city put in place without consulting the district. And the end result was the district received less in revenue from facility rentals than we likely should have. A key component of the city's pricing structure was that it provided unlimited use and numbers of grass fields for youth sports. Absolutely.
I think the other thing that's important to know is that the $15 per participant has been on the books for over 5 years. We think it's about 7 without any increase. So just if you just did inflation, it'd be about $25. So I think that's important to note. It hasn't gone up in many, many years.
So as we inherited that model from the city, when we took over management of our own facilities, we kept it in place. And so the slide here that you see is what each of the leagues was charged based on their $15 per participant for grass fields or gymnasiums. Some groups received credits, which I will cover in a few slides. And for those that did not, or that did see the presentation last time, I would point out that we've added lacrosse to the presentation. So each slide will have those numbers as well, because we did not have that data previously. When you factor in how many hours of field use each organization scheduled, you can see the disparity in pricing. The disparity is particularly evident when you consider that some of these charges are essentially for the same exact field. And you can see we have everything from $10 an hour for wrestling in a gym. Basketball pays about a quarter of that for gymnasiums also. And then on grass fields, you have from the high of soccer at $5.47 an hour to 91 cents for softball. And again, much of these are literally the same spaces, just used at different times of the year by different organizations. And by all means, stop me if you have questions along the way, please. So the new pricing structure was revised for better parity amongst the groups for both sports and activities. And to meet our desire of improved parity, we are planning for the following hybrid model for pricing on grass fields and in gyms. And the participant fee will drop from the $15 per participant to $5. And then we're adding a $2 per hour fee for grass fields and gymnasiums. There are also some other outcomes from this structure. One, it encourages leagues to schedule what they need and will actually use. And you will see why this is important in a few slides. This will also give the district the opportunity to rent unused time to other organizations, thus allowing us to further cover some of our district support costs. We are also proposing lowering the cost of turf fields to make them more financially accessible to more groups. And I would point out that while we're lowering our turf cost, other local turf fields, those costs have actually gone up recently. So using the new pricing structure and this year's data, this is what groups would have paid prior to any discounts or more efficient scheduling. And as you would expect, some groups went up, some went down, and one is about the same. When you look at that new structure, this is the same data here. It just shows the per hour price on the right.
And Jim, I want to confirm, this is before there are any credits for field work.
Yes.
Okay.
And as you can see, there's still a disparity in what each group pays per hour. Some pay less, some pay more, but it's much closer than that range of 91 cents to $10.20 that we previously saw. Here we go. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and as Director Adamson mentioned, there are some credits. Baseball and softball both get credits based on their prepping fields at the beginning of their seasons. It's $2,500 for baseball and about $1,500 for softball. And then in addition, other sports that use the SMS stadium have the opportunity to receive a $150 credit for cleaning up the stadium when they rent it for the entire day. This again makes their cost per hour comparison more favorable, or excuse me, this again though makes the cost per hour comparison more favorable for some groups than others. And also some groups are more easily able to get credits than others. We have some groups like basketball and wrestling that don't have the opportunity to earn credits at this point. So one area we think will help our a few of our groups is in more efficient scheduling. And under the previous model, there was no need to limit scheduling because there was no additional cost. It provided maximum flexibility to the youth sports groups, but limited the district's ability to rent out unused time to other groups. The new model provides an incentive to only schedule what is actually needed. We believe the first 4 groups can decrease their scheduling time without limiting their actual use. And if they do, their cost comes down. This is important because we have other groups that want to use our fields. And if we can do that without impacting the times that our local youth groups want the fields or need them, then it becomes a value to us to be able to rent those. And for example, last year we had a youth baseball group that wasn't local who rented one field twice a week, and they paid more than our local youth baseball league did for the 5,000 hours that they used it. That was even before they received credit. So there is a significant opportunity for us when our fields are sitting empty. And this proposal gives us the ability to try to make sure that we're being efficient with our space and have the opportunity at least to rent that out as well. So I wanted to show this slide because these are the known costs associated with using these facilities for competitive non-high school athletics. So we're not talking about the facilities at the high school, but we are talking about the rest of our competitive athletic fields. And these are monies that actually come from the general fund, which supports classrooms and students and staff. And as you can see, we have over $100,000 in annual costs directly related to supporting these competitive fields. We also have a significant cost that we can't clearly determine due to the need to mow twice a week on athletic fields during the growing season. So really from April to October, all these fields get mowed twice a week. If those were general lawn, like we have, say, in front of the ridges, those would get mowed once a week. So there's an additional cost just to doing that twice every week. Now, just to be very clear, this is not about the district trying to recoup more money from our youth organizations, but is about parity of pricing. And as you can see, the previous amount that
I'm sorry, can we go back a slide? And
Sure.
I apologize for interrupting, but I just want to confirm, these are costs that are hard costs, not offset by the work that the teams do to prep the fields.
Correct.
Okay, so these are, if we would pay more if they didn't do that prep work, but these are hard costs we have irregardless of that work.
Correct.
Excuse me, regardless of work. So thank you, appreciate that.
Certainly. So under the current pricing structure, the one that we're operating in this year, for the hours that were, or for the number of participants that were signed up with each group, our revenue is about $39,500. That's before credits. Under the new proposed structure, that would rise to $43,000. So about 10% higher. However, for those 4 groups that I mentioned earlier that we believe can decrease their costs, maybe, or their use 20%, our revenue is actually likely to decline. And as more groups take advantage of the ability to do credits at SMS Stadium and those kinds of things, that revenue comes even lower. And if you take that with the previous slide, the revenue picture, and the known cost, you can see where we are not even close to recouping the expenses of the district, which is actually what board policy requires. And this a large amount of money is again coming from the general fund that supports classrooms. And as Vince mentioned just a few minutes ago, you heard him say that we must be good stewards of the public resource that we've been entrusted with. As you might expect, the feedback from groups depends on the deal they received under the city's pricing structure and how this new parity model affects their cost. 5 out of the 7 local youth sports groups are very supportive of this change. They appreciate the clear pricing model and the fact that it's not just based on the number of players. For soccer and football, they believe they can be more efficient with their scheduling and decrease their costs. Of the 2 remaining groups, I would suggest that, or I would say that one doesn't like the pricing going up, but they understand our desire for parity across our groups. And the other group is not comfortable with the changes. And both of these groups still enjoy the lowest cost per hour of any of the groups, even with the new pricing structure. And I would add that Ken and I have committed with our groups to make sure that we are supporting them in finding ways that they can be efficient with their scheduling to help them decrease those potential costs. And with that, I would open it to any questions.
Okay, I'm gonna try not to ramble, but I feel like I have a million questions around this whole thing. I mean, in my head, first, I think like, how is this policy if we haven't been meeting it for so long and we're not even attempting to meet it? Does anyone know like why it's a policy here?
My intent is
means-
to bring a new policy back to you once we get to this proposed pricing structure, to bring a policy back that more aligns with what we're actually able to do. Because to be honest, if we were to try to recoup all those costs, even just the 100,000 that we know is a hard cost, we would price all of our local youth sports out of being able to use our facilities. And that's not the board policy's intent. That's not our intent. So I think the board policy needs to be adjusted to more accurately reflect our reality.
And I know that you don't know all the other districts' budgets, and it's impossible to compare, us to every other person around us. But there are other districts around us that aren't charging their local teams to use their fields and facilities.
Yeah.
So do we have any idea how they are creative enough to offset that?
I'm
Or
not
that-
sure on that, like
Okay.
on that side. I know Ken has some figures. I'm gonna look to him to make sure he remembers them, about what some of the other other school districts around us also charge, because it's a variety from
Yeah.
free to, I'll let Ken fill in.
Based on my research, I only found 2 districts near us who don't charge their local feeder programs, and that's Newburgh and McMinnville. Or at least if they do, they charge very little. And then it varies greatly in our other surrounding districts, Hillsborough, Beaverton, Tigard, Westland, Wilsonville, et cetera. Their charges are anywhere from $20 an hour to like $50 an hour. I mean, significantly more. So there's a really broad swath of what people have done on what they're doing. And our intent is to try to find something in the middle of that, not trying to make money, but try to just be fair about how we charge people. Honestly, Jim and I went out and met with each of these groups individually, either by Zoom or went to their board meetings physically. And the groups who were being charged significantly more for the same spots are now questioning that our previous pricing structure because of how that looked for them. And that's why you have a disparity in the feedback from folks, is like Jim said, if they were getting a great deal before and it's going up, they have concerns, understandably. And what we tried to show them is that they're going to be paying relatively the same price for the same field as the other organizations. And that I think is the biggest key. Regardless of what structure we go to, we need to do something that charges the same organizations the same price for the same field, or whatever that price is.
No, I do appreciate that. And I by no means want you to feel like because I have all these questions, I don't completely respect all the time and effort you guys have put into this, because I know I've heard this presentation several times, and logically, it makes a lot of sense to me, and how you guys got to these numbers do make a ton of sense. But I just also have to sit with the fact that, the feedback I hear from the community is that they're concerned about how high the prices go, about what that money actually goes to. And this was the first time I ever saw a slide that showed $101,000 was like your hard cost. And even at that, I mean, it's huge chunk just says $80,000. And so do you guys have any conversations with these teams about what their money is actually going to pay for? Because that seems to be a common thing that is brought up to me.
Yeah, we did answer. That was one of the questions that we answered in each one of those feedback, where it goes to our maintaining of those fields. And that the 80,000 is a hard contract that we have with Pacific Sports Turf to do all of that conditioning of those fields. And we do it once a year, where we close them for 2 weeks and do that. And it only is on our sports fields, not on any of our lawn things. So it's a hard cost just for those fields. And it's a contract that we piggyback on.
So the $80,000 is just to maintain the turf fields?
No.
Oh, sorry. Can
Just
you
to
repeat?
maintain the grass fields that are not at the high school.
Oh,
So that's
okay,
for
okay.
all other fields in the district that are used by youth sports. So the what that takes care of, what we do once a year is a full conditioning of the fields, which includes aerating them, deep tining, slice seeding, sanding them, all the things that are necessary in Oregon with the amount of rainfall we get that depletes it of all the nutrients, and it's so clay based that we use that to then recondition the fields. And if you don't do that, they look a little bit more like, if you go look at what the front lawns look like at the high school right now, which haven't been treated anyway, they're really thin, really brown, really, there's not enough turf there to really even create any kind of bounce or anything. That's what it looks like. And because we're trying to wait to do that till school gets out, to get those looking a little better. But we do those on our sports fields every year in order to keep them in good shape.
All right, what about for like basketball, the gymnasiums? People that are paying for that usage, what is that going to?
So that will lights, HVAC, neither of which would be on if we weren't. We also have to clean after they're gone. Bathrooms, so the gym itself has to be picked up. I mean, like this year alone, our custodians probably spend an hour each night cleaning the gym after basketball teams left, that they wouldn't have done if it was PE, because the PE teachers don't let them leave masks and water bottles and sweatshirts and stuff everywhere. And so there's about an hour per night at each school that does that. And then we obviously the equipment inside the gym, some of that's used for PE, but not things like scoreboards and all of the hoops and things like that are infrequently used in PE. So those things are repaired. So we probably spent probably $10,000 repairing basketball hoops this year that broke, the ones that go up and down or move in and out from the wall. Because those, when we move them in for games, for the side hoops and then move them back out, and they just wear out each year. So those are kind of the common costs for that. Plus building. Oh yeah, and in basketball, the big cost is building monitors for Saturdays. So we hire Saturday employees to cover that, so that they can open closed buildings and clean them and those kinds of things. And so that cost was $11,200 this past year for being open on Saturdays.
Those are mostly the things I assumed it would cover, but I just wanted to make sure we were answering that question since I've had it asked a lot of times. The other last thing I have, and then I'm sorry, I won't take up everyone else's time, but have you had any of the teams come back with a response of what they do think would make it more agreeable or what they do think would make it more effective of a plan for them? Because I just think like, I know baseball is obviously one of them that's not thrilled with this change, and I get that. But I think about small things like they get a credit back if they don't use the field because it rained out. You know, everybody who's running that organization, I'm sure, is a volunteer.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine that's a ton of time for that volunteer to, you know, check in with every single coach and see if they use their field and then report it back. And if the field was rained out or to the degree they couldn't use it, surely we weren't going to be able to rent it out to somebody else either. So just all that back and forth
Mhm.
seems difficult.
So what we talked about with them is that they already do a notification from their field manager of whether fields are playable each day, and they do apparently a text message. And so we talked about just adding me to that text message, so that then I would be able to go in and give them credits for any fields they didn't use. I mean, I will tell you, one of the issues with baseball is they reserve every field everywhere. And even at the board meeting, there were 2 coaches present who said they don't use their Saturday slot that they have reserved. And so that's the whole point of the $2 an hour, is to try and get people to either use the field or let it go so that others people can use it. So.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I know there are a lot of inefficiencies and we have to like figure it out on both ends. I just, you know, have an interest in making sure that those organizations are also really getting to weigh in on this and have some feedback before we, you know, change our system.
And I'll go back to address one thing. As far as I think of the board policy and where we were with some of our facilities is that schools have little or no way essentially to raise revenue. You know, we're not making money on things from the kids, and we get what we get from the state formula. So at one point, you know, I think the idea was, hey, we have these great facilities, and now we certainly have amazing facilities, and we have the ability to potentially make some revenue on them. That doesn't mean we want to make it on the youth kids, but if all the fields are booked, it's hard to make it, you know, on some of those others. So I think that's why it's important as we move forward to try and be as efficient as possible with our fields and make sure if they're used or if they're playable or usable, that somebody is able to you know, seize that opportunity. So I think, you know, what we did discover is that, you know, it doesn't pencil out. We can't, you know, we're not going to ask our community to pay an exorbitant amount, you know, so that the district can make money on it. But at the same time, we've got to be cognizant and try and be as fair and reasonable as possible. And I think changing that policy clearly makes sense because things are a little different now that we're a little bit farther down the road.
Madam Chair, I just want to thank Ken and Jim. I asked a million questions at the last board meeting about this, and one of the things that we discussed offline is that exact effort to try and figure out for both baseball and softball, how do we make sure for unforeseen when there's going to be a rain out, that we be as flexible and as it was described to me, almost more flexible for those two sports as it relates to last minute rain delays than for other sports that may have to notify 72 hours in advance. We're willing to accept kind of even day of announcements and give credits. And so I'll be really interested in what that looks like hopefully at the end of this season. Hopefully we'll see that take kind of a practice run at it and just see kind of what the actual cost impact is. But I am really cognizant, and the more I've sat with it, the more concerned I've been about this kind of rather wide differentiation between what one sport pays versus another sport. And I do like the effort to try and level that out. And I am also very cognizant that for some sports, if we adopt a fee schedule this spring, that will go into effect for, say, soccer and football and others almost immediately. Whereas I think as we look at the end of this baseball season and we get it'll apply to the following baseball season. And so we'll have a chance to take a look at that, see kind of what those costs are and level them out. But I do think that this idea that if soccer is using the back end of a baseball field, that they should be paying roughly the same amount for the same space, so that we can look our constituents in the eye and say, we're not favoring one sport or another, but that we're trying really hard to keep all fields affordable. I really support the coming change in the policy to not make us get fully reimbursed for the actual cost. As I said before, the taxpayers built these fields, and it is good for the physical and mental health of our kids to be out there playing whatever it is that they want to play, or hitting a drum or a cymbal, or whatever it is that brings them joy. That's part of what has brought me joy this spring, is seeing kids using our fields. And so I'm really pleased that a lot of these changes are going to make it more affordable for kids to use the fields. I think we need to just pay some special attention to softball and baseball and see if we can't give them some time and some space to be able to make this change in a way that is understandable, and builds more flexibility and really focuses on how do we get the maximum use out of the hours that we have these facilities available, while ensuring that our youth sports have a full season. And so I think that's hopefully a continued partnership that we are able to achieve in the long run.
One other thing is, even though we usually make this change on a fiscal year, when we bring this proposal to you for a vote, we're going to, Jim, I hope you're okay with this, but we're going to be asking for it to start August 1st, not July 1st, because many of our sports go through the middle of July, and I don't want to change things on them in the middle of their season. So, and everything else sort of starts in August. So I'm good with that.
And any other questions, comments?
I mean, I said this to you by email, and I'll say it again, that I don't want my concerns to come off as not being thankful for all the work that you guys are putting in and all the information that you're gathering. Where I'm coming from is just that I'm a mom of kids in sports, and so obviously we have other families with kids in sports, and the conversation is ongoing on how just unorganized it is, how unaffordable it is. I just this last week, I was told by two parents in different areas of sports that they're probably not going to be able to afford to do it moving forward. Especially, you've got kids with families with multiple kids, and these are kids that, just like Jessica said, they this is so important to these kids to be out and doing these activities, these sports. There's so much more to it than just playing the sport. And I don't want to do anything that's going to affect that and impact them negatively. And in the long run, when we're really looking at this, these are kids that eventually become district players. So we want to set them up for success, and we want to continue that success train. And so I feel like this is such a, for some it might feel small. For me, it feels like a really big decision because there's been so much conversation and feedback about it. And so some of my concerns were definitely addressed tonight. And so I appreciate that. I still definitely advocate for something where there is a conversational based work type session where we can really ask questions directly to these organizations, and just like the training we just watched about engaging with our community stakeholders and all of that. I mean, I feel like that falls right into line with that type of thing. So I appreciate the additional information. I understand it, but that still doesn't take away my concerns or desires for that letter.
I'd add one kind of data point for you, which is currently they're charged at $15 a participant. If baseball after credits and can cut 20% out of their use, they're going to pay about $20 per participant for this year. So if we've left the impression that their price is going to be so much higher that students aren't going to be able to play, that's the numbers we're talking about, is $15 per participant before and now $20, which is not insignificant. I understand $5 matters, but I think that's an important piece to also keep in mind.
I totally agree with you. And on that note, when we're talking about the fees that the kids are playing, it's like in that conversation, you can ask those questions of okay, your organization is charging this, what's that going towards, and how is this proposed fee change affecting that fee change, and so forth. It's just an opportunity for questions and clarity. That's all where I'm coming from. It's a two-way conversation. If this is going to result in this type of price increase, help us understand why, so we can better work with you, and vice versa.
I think just to piggyback on that too, because I hear everything you're saying and I fully understand it too. And I believe it, but I also hear, from members of other teams that say, if this change happens, our prices to our teammates will double. So in my head, I can't make sense of that math. And I can't be on all those boards, and I can't sit in your shoes. And so the only thing I know to do is say, can we submit a report or come together or figure this out? Because I want it to be fair, but I also want our school district to be financially responsible. That's our job, and that's your guys' job. So I support you in that 100%. And I understand that's what your job is to do. I'm just trying to wear both hats and figure out where we meet in the middle with that. And sometimes it's hard when you don't have I can't have all that data. So
I will say, when we met with each of those boards, we presented this same data to them. And so they have seen it. So if they're saying it doubled, I'm not sure those are board members who are saying that, because they know different.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. And with that, we will recess for about 20 minutes and reconvene for our regular board meeting at 7 p.m. Thank you.